Welcome to the Biz Gone Social podcast. We help entrepreneurs navigate how to get known, get customers, and get the edge over their competition. Here is your host, Lorraine Duncan.
Hey everyone, this is Lorraine with Biz Gone Social podcast. I'm so glad to be here. And of course, my promise to you, as always, is I want to give you a little bit of verbal caffeine that's going to energize your business and help you stay social. Because after all, don't you want to be the business that everyone's talking about? I know I do. And I am so stoked today to have Richard Howard with me. Welcome, Richard.
Right. Thanks for having me.
So tell me a little bit about what you do, who you serve.
Sure. So I help mainly small businesses, some medium-sized companies, sell products and services to the U.S. federal government. And that's the shortest answer I could give you.
I love that because I gathered that from everything that I read about you and everything. So, how does that work? Because it's way different than I know a lot of small businesses will apply for these government grants and everything. Mm-hmm. So that's a little different. But, in all my time of being in business for myself, I never thought of wanting to work for the government only because it takes so long to get everything done. With other services that I've done with them. And so I figured that, probably cash flow would be really bad. So how does one get started? And is it very lucrative for a small business who has a lot of services and products that the government needs? Is it easy for them to get a contract?
Yeah, so those are all good questions. So maybe we should start with the opportunity, right? So the U.S. federal government's the single biggest purchaser of goods and services in the entire world. They buy just about everything you could think of, believe it or not, also social media marketing, and in billions of dollars on a lot of different categories that you might not suspect. They have to put small businesses on contract. So I was in the Air Force for 20 years. I was a procurement officer. So my job was to put companies on contract to solve government requirements. Now, government has to award a certain amount of contracts to small businesses, but less than half of 1% of small businesses out there even attempt to sell to the government for various reasons, right? Timeline, you mentioned, is one of them. So the process may not be intuitive, but to discuss how lucrative it is. Every contract's different, but I can tell you the average small business makes about $2.4 million in revenue selling to the government. Some much, much, much higher than that, because that's an average. Some, could be a lot lower than that. It might be a $50,000 contract or something. But on average, once you figure it out, you can do very well as a small business selling to the government. And by the way, small business, if you have under 500 employees, less than, 15, 20 million a year, you're probably considered a small business by the U.S. government.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming, first of all, I wanted to say thank you for your service. But secondly, I'm assuming that this is how do you know if you're a small business, how do you know if one of your services could be contracted by the government?
Yeah. So, one of my favorite things, and I geek out on this a little bit, so you might have to stop me from kind of describing the whole process. But one of my favorite things about public sector or government contracting is that everything that the U.S. government puts on contract is essentially public knowledge. It has to be made publicly available. So, how much the government spends, what are they buying, who are they putting on contract, how are they putting them on contract? The businesses that sell to the government, you can look up any of your competitors that are selling to the government, and you can see exactly how much they made, what contracts, what offices are they selling to. So all of this, what it can do is, companies that figure it out utilize this information to kind of reverse engineer who they're going to be selling to and how to do it. Now, you could use the same tools just to find out the answer to your question, which is, does the government buy what I sell? They can go to usaspending.gov. It's a free government website. And you could type in something like legal services, accounting services. There's North American industry classification codes for most industries, information technology. And it's going to tell you, and you can do it by year. So you could, if it was IT, you'd see $50 billion over the past couple of years. But if it was something like accounting, you might see $4 or $5 billion in accounting services spent over the last couple of years. And then you can keep going down. How much of that was given to small businesses? If you're a woman-owned small business, how much of that goes to woman-owned small businesses? Who is doing it? Is it the Air Force? Is it Department of Energy? If it's the Air Force, you might want to know also what offices in the Air Force are in charge of that, because most people in the government can't buy anything from you. It's usually acquisitions offices that are doing that. And so we can know with pretty precise detail which offices are in charge of buying the types of services and products that you're selling.
Wow. I mean, that's actually really fairly interesting. I kind of really never really thought about making money through, as being a small business. Because like if you get involved in a project, you're like in this project. I've been involved in a lot of projects, and sometimes it's very time consuming. So It doesn't leave, so I never really kind of thought about that. So
yeah.
How do you, so you work with people who you try to help them leverage these contracts. I'm assuming that's some of the things you do for them.
Yeah, they really fit into two different categories. One is part of what I'm doing is trying to get the word out there, right? So it was always a struggle to try to find businesses that had the technology, the solution that we wanted, and also knew the process for selling to the government. Most of them were usually unaware of how to go about it. So one is make everyone aware that there's an opportunity out there. So there's one group of customers where we take from square one, meaning this is how you register your business to sell to the government. This is how you figure out who's buying what you sell and how you're going to sell to them. And that's at dodcontract.com. We have an academy there that's basically online, on-demand training plus weekly coaching with myself and other team members to take them through that process. And then a more advanced level would be businesses that are already selling to the government and they want to optimize what they're doing. And so we do that. That's more of a traditional consulting approach.
How typically, I'm just curious because, so say that I get a $1.8 million contract with the government. How do they typically pay? How does that, because I always think about cash flow and
sure.
And so how does that work?
Yeah, so typically you're going to invoice the government for the work you do. So if you're doing, a $1.8 million contract and you're providing a service, or maybe you're working on a marketing project for them, right? Doing something that you're doing now, that might be a year or 2 year contract, right? Now, when you invoice the government, to speak to your point, I think what you're really getting at is there a delay in, them paying you? Well, yeah, if you invoice them, you're probably going to see a 30, 60, 90-day delay. Almost like if you work with a lot of big companies, you might see that same type of delay with them. But the difference is there are financial institutions that are set up just for companies that are selling to the government. So if you have a government contract, there's very few things that are worth what a government contract is as far as justifying someone to invest in you. Or selling your company, by the way, is a great, if you have government contracts, that will increase the valuation pretty significantly. But the financial institutions that I'm talking about, by the way, we have them on our podcast. We do interview some of those people, and we have relationships with them. They'll give you the funding to pay your invoices and everything else that you have until the government can pay you. And they basically use that government contract as collateral. So they know that the government's going to pay you because the government always pays. Even if the government cancels a contract with you, they're still going to pay you for everything that you've done. There's quite a bit of legal requirement and regulation in the federal contracting process. So,
yeah, so it kind of eliminates those. It's like when you're, when you are a small business, sometimes people don't pay you.
Yeah,
and so that's kind of a nice little guarantee there. I love it. I'm going to switch gears. This has been really fun talking about government contracts. Is there anything else before I get to the next part of the podcast, is there anything when it comes to, being a small business and going after government contracts that is like the number one most important thing that a small business should be doing?
Yes, there's a few things, but I would say that outside of knowing that the government buys what you sell, the number one mistake businesses make when they try to sell to the government is assuming the process is kind of like a B2B or a B2C process. It's not. You can go to, where the repositories are for these solicitations like sam.gov and see that the government is, let's say they have a project for social media advertising, and you see that and you see a request for proposal or a request for quote. That's an official government solicitation. And you may read through that and see that it is perfect for you, perfect for your business. You write the proposal, and then, which is a lot of work, and then you don't win. And you might do that 4 or 5 times and you don't win and you don't win. And then you see the people that are winning and it looks like your competitors. And then maybe you take a little bit, and I hear this a lot. You keep looking at it and you're like, wow, it looks almost like the proposal, the contract was written for my competitors. So they throw their hands up in the air, must be rigged. It's not rigged. What's actually happening there is there are just different phases of the acquisitions process. So when a solicitation comes out, and this is the point I really want to make, just know that you can assume that other companies have already been talking to the government for months prior to that solicitation release. When the solicitation comes out, the handcuffs are on. The government, you're not going to influence anything. You're probably not going to be able to meet with or talk to them. If you ask a question, they're going to be very hesitant to even respond to you unless they do it in a public way, because a contract award can be protested for showing preferential treatment. And this happens quite a bit, and especially with the bigger companies. So the contracting officers are going to be very careful not to show any preferential treatment once that solicitation comes out. But before that, something called the market research phase, and that's where you want to engage with the government. So just know that you want to find these opportunities as far ahead of time as you can. And then you want to meet with the government office. And this is more like probably regular selling. You're developing a relationship. You're letting them know what you can do. And the things that you're telling them could end up in the solicitation, your certifications, the type of business you are. You can eliminate other businesses. If you're a woman-owned small business or a service-disabled vet business, you can have the government set aside a solicitation for your type of business and write it kind of for you or using the information you provide. And they know you, you're much more likely to win. So that would be my one piece of information to everyone. You want to start early. Don't start with the solicitation. Start before that.
Really great advice. And are there ways to find out like how to get in early? Are there, how do you know that somebody is going to make that, eventually somebody in the government is going to make that solicitation?
There's several ways to do that. You can learn all of them through our academy, of course. You can learn them for free, a lot of them on our podcast, which is also called DoD Contract Academy. I would say if I was going to give them one tip, you want to look for something called a sources sought. If you go to sam.gov and register your business, which is where you do that, a sources sought, that comes before a solicitation. And when you see that, that's the government saying, I have something I need to put on contract, and maybe I don't quite know everything that's going to go in the solicitation yet. It usually means they have money and a requirement, but you might be able to influence some of the things that go into that. Potentially could even win a sole source contract if you do something very unique. So you can advise the government on the best way to go about putting something on contract.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you. Like, very knowledgeable. I mean, if you're a small business out there and you want to kind of leverage what you do and maybe niche down into just trying to get some government contracts, this sounds like it would be the way to go. So again, this is the part of the podcast where we have a little fun. I get a little bit real. So tell me why you love what you do and being in business for yourself.
Yeah, well, I mean, I love both. I think I love what I do. I spent so long in the military, and doing something very similar in the military, this keeps me connected to the public sector. So I still get to work with a lot of government offices when I'm helping clients sell to the government. I get to maintain my network and go to conferences. So I get to keep my fingers in it and serving in a different way, and that's another nice thing about, being a business that's selling to the government. If you're, providing a technology that helps military members do something or stay safe, then, that's something you can be proud of and something that helps our national security. And even if it's selling food or something like that, it's still nice to be helping the government in some way. So I enjoyed that part of it. And then, as far as being in business, like, I've always loved business, and, I was selling broken toys door to door when I was 5 or 6 years old. So I really enjoy the process and, the selling part of it and the creative piece of it. And yeah, it's kind of my passion.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
A lot of our friends, family, they may think it's pretty cool that we own our own businesses. And, there always is the naysayers. And of course, my parents still ask me, 20 years later, when am I going to get a job? But what I was going to say is, what would you say is your biggest struggle in today's world with running your own business?
My biggest struggle is probably just opportunity overload. It's a very unique space. And so we get a lot of offers to do a lot of different things. And so for me, it's trying to stay focused on, the mission objective. So I'm not spread too thin. I mean, that right now, that's definitely my biggest problem.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of ours. Sometimes it's even a matter of even saying no to something that could be possibly a great opportunity. But then when you say no to something, we all know that there's going to be a yes to something that could possibly be better. So
right.
It's always
it's hard. That is hard to do.
One piece of advice that universal, so it could be for somebody who's thinking of starting their business, they could be just starting out, or they're seasoned. One piece of universal advice that would help them move forward and encourage them in this journey.
Yeah. Well, every business is a little bit different. I have a couple pieces of advice there. One is, your initial idea might not be like the perfect thing for you to be in business for. And if it's not, you can pivot. And I think today, one of the benefits we have, I know we were talking about before the podcast about a little bit about technology and raising kids and whatnot and the challenges. But one of the benefits for being in business is now you can do a lot from your house. You can do a lot online. I started my business during COVID. And, a lot of people would have seen that as the death knell, but everything really took off because everyone started working remotely. And so you have the ability using technology today to try out a lot of different things. Some of those things could be things that you try before you leave your current job. So it may be that if you have a skill set and you're going to consult or like provide advice or coach or do something like that, you might go and set up an Upwork profile and as a freelancer and just to try it out. You can see, on there, different people that are in your space, what kind of services are they offering? You can get a sense of how much they're making as well and the reviews. And you can start playing around with different niches. And I think that that's actually a really easy way to break into a consulting type business without leaving your job and trying to see what works and what people will pay you for. And again, just a couple of thoughts there, but that would be that'd be what I'd say to them.
Thank you. Well, I'm sure there's somebody that, has resonated with you and, especially if they're thinking, wow, they never thought about, government contracts and getting money from them. So how would they get in touch with you if they want to learn more?
Yeah. So best thing to do is go to dodcontract.com. That's where we have our academy. You can also look up our podcast. It's DoD Contract Academy. It's on all the podcasting platforms. And if it's somebody that maybe they know government sales, but they need a process, they need something, they can go to govclose.com. We just launched our CRM and pipelining tool specific for selling to the government this week. So I think that's something, well, of course, this is going to probably air months from now. But so that's something that a lot of our clients and students are using now it just gives them something that they can use to walk them through step by step what the process is.
That's awesome. Well, again, I want to thank you, Richard, for being a great guest on my show. And to everyone out there, I just want to thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, check out Richard's podcast, and I will see you soon. Have a great week. Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Biz Gone Social podcast. Find us on Instagram at Biz Gone Social for extra tips. Check back weekly for new episodes. Until next time, stay social.